And we are back, of course, for another episode of Dark Bites podcast. This time with none other than Mr. Rath James White. Thank you very, very much for jumping in here and chatting with us today, Rath. Really appreciate that, man.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to get right to it because I know you've got so much stuff on the go right now. I want to talk to you about a couple of books that you've done, what stuff you're perhaps working on in the future, and of course, you've got your KillerCon that's coming up next month as well, and all the other things that no doubt are keeping you busy and maybe a little bit out of trouble. I do want to chat with you about one of the newest releases that you did, Voracious, which you were nice enough to do that during my birthday month in May. So thank you for thinking of me for that. First thing I noticed, of course, on this thing is that the cover is absolutely bonkers. It's funny, my 5-year-old looked at it yesterday and he's like, well, it's not really too gross. It's more creepy than anything, but I think it kind of straddles that quite a bit. So it made me at least want to ask you, like, what the heck kind of feedback or maybe illicit substances that you fed the cover artist Justin Kuhn for him to have come up with such a killer cover for Voracious.
So Justin Kuntz is one of my favorite cover artists, and I specifically asked for him on this project. And the funny thing is as he was sending in suggestions and I would make suggestions on his suggestions, I really didn't have a clear concept of where he was going. So as it started to come together, I was like, this is so much better than what I had envisioned. That's why you are the visual artist and I'm the writer.
Were you able to stag an art piece of that to put on your wall as well?
No, you know what? And I have Justin actually bought so these are my mailers, and I actually have to mail him his copy of the book. Maybe I'll hold that book hostage just see if he'll give me a print of that cover.
No judgment here. Hey, whatever it takes. That's awesome. I think pretty much it's safe to say too, like anybody that's goes out and reads the synopsis for Voracious, especially if they've read you before, can safely assume that the stuff that's inside is just as juicy, gory, and over the top awesome as the stuff that's on the outside. Pygmy shrews, of course, have quite a bit to do with what goes on with the story as well, without giving too much of that away. When did you first become aware of this god-awful nature of pygmy shrews? I'd love to hear about the proverbial rabbit hole that you went down.
So, the interesting thing is I first heard about how vicious pygmy shrews were on a TV show back in the 80s called That's Incredible.
I love that show.
Yeah. And they did this whole thing where they followed this pygmy shrew around as it was just killing things. And they're the size of a quarter. They're tiny. And they were like attacking praying mantises, attacking birds and lizards and all that, just killing everything and then they would go to sleep. And I believe pygmy shrew, it's like every 30 minutes they have to eat, if I remember correctly. So they would kill something, eat it, and then immediately dig a hole, go to sleep, and then emerge voracious and just attack whatever was nearby because they had to eat again, because their metabolisms are so fast, they don't actually store fat cells. So they have to eat or they die. And I thought, that is amazing. What if human beings had a metabolism like that? And then as I was researching for a project that I was doing with my son on naked DNA and different types of things, because there had been some discussion with the Olympics about the possibility of gene doping and how they were afraid that athletes were going to start tinkering with their DNA in the future. So I think it was around 2012, they started requiring that athletes submit DNA tests so that, when gene doping becomes a thing, they'll be able to test it against their original genes. And I thought, wow, this is the story. Gene doping for weight loss using pygmy shrew DNA. So that's amazing. And obviously the horror story in that is it kind of writes itself.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, nature is such a fascinating thing. I had no idea. I thought pygmy shears, when I first heard of them, I thought they were sort of like these little mole rat creatures that you typically would see with the shrews. I mean, they're pretty nasty and gnarly looking, but yeah, I had no idea that there is a difference between a typical shrew and then, the pygmy shrew.
Yeah, yeah, they're pretty, and they actually their fangs even have a little neurotoxin in them that partially paralyze their victims, and so they're just like killing machines. These things. It's a good thing that they are only the size of a quarter. Because if
Right.
they were the size of like a dog, we'd all die.
Exactly. My God, yeah. Here's hoping they don't evolve beyond what they've already evolved beyond. Here's hoping they don't read your story and start getting any crazy ideas. That's awesome. And I know, speaking of reading the book as well, a lot of your longtime readers might actually recall that, the title's a bit familiar to them, as it came out previously back in what, 2013, I think it was, through Sinister Grin Press. Uh,
Yes.
so obviously that kind of lends itself to its own question as to why now, why the re-release, and why this one.
So, Sinister Green Press, when Shane McKenzie left, they didn't survive without him. And I love that story when it was written. And I never thought that it got the audience that it deserved. So when Cemetery Dance came knocking and looking for a novel, and they may have actually specifically asked for that one. I'm not at all really remember exactly how it went. I think they actually did specifically ask for it because a lot of my old Sinister Grin titles I republished with Deadeye Press, but I never had republished that particular one. And so it just seemed like the right time and the right publisher.
Perfect. Makes a lot of sense. And this might be more evidence of what a nerd or how anal I can be sometimes, but I noticed that the difference between the Cemetery Dance edition and the Grin Press, I think Cemetery Dance was something, well, at least in the listing, was listed as being about 13 pages shorter than the Sinister edition. Was that just a matter of layout, or was there something different about the two editions?
No, it was just the layout, the font type, and things like that.
Oh, okay, cool. Here, I thought I came across some sort of little well-hidden secret. They're like, oh, nobody was supposed to notice that, and yeah, we did this, and well, so just a matter of the layout. So that's pretty straightforward. That's awesome.
Mm.
And when you were, I guess I found it kind of interesting as well, because not only do you talk about the shrews, that's really cool how you came across shrews and tie them into a badass story like this, but obviously your book involves a bit more than just these ferocious, shrews that basically just, fornicate, they feed, they sleep, and that's pretty much their life cycle. But at what point did you kind of tie in the ravenous shrews with an anti-dieting approach to the plot line?
Well, again, I think the story almost wrote itself. We have an obsession with beauty and a specific kind of beauty paradigm in this country, and I'd say in the Western world. And their beauty equals being skinny, and there's a $1 billion weight loss industry around it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think of the mad scientists, uh, I don't I don't imagine that, and this is perhaps my cynicism. I don't imagine that there are a lot of brilliant scientists with altruistic intentions these days. I think they have very capitalistic intentions.
Yeah,
And I could imagine that if this technology became available, um, that it would be used to maximize profits. And the weight loss industry, the beauty industry itself, is a profit making machine that preys on primarily women. Basically, their whole business model is make people feel shitty about themselves, excuse my language, but but to make people hate themselves in order to sell their products, so it's already a predatorial and pretty awful industry. why wouldn't they take basically this horrific technology and use it for profit?
Everywhere you look, I mean, you've got a young girl that might look at some health and fitness things because she wants to maybe get in better shape and have that, ideal, physique so that to be the envy or at least not the laughing stock of her friends and whatnot. And because of that, of course, the algorithms being what they are, all of a sudden start shoving these diet things. And she's like, you mean instead of joining a gym and doing all these exercises at home, I could just take a pill? This is fantastic. Maybe I'll have to throw up now and again. But yeah, yeah, it's terrible. I know it's to the point where our mutual friend, Dean Italiano, actually wrote a whole book all about that as well, the Starving Queen, all about the sinister aspect of the commercial stuff. So yeah, certainly that does seem like it really ties in well with the shrew.
Not to give too much of the book away, but I also kind of tied in some social media stuff because we have been so programmed by media to think of beauty and fitness and health as only one image.
Mm-hmm.
That I think if technology like this were to be made public to the masses with all the side effect, like the side effect, if we stated, hey, there's a possible side effect that you might cannibalize your loved ones, there would still be people who would opt for it.
Yeah.
Just to be beautiful.
Yeah, it's like, well, if my family really supports me, they'll lay on the dinner table and take it. So yeah, I know that's and it's pretty awful, and I agree with that too. I mean, look at all the warning labels, of course, they put on cigarettes. I don't think that did much to stop people from smoking. They just made them feel more badass. It's like, I'm dangerous, I'm edgy, look at what I'm doing, and haha, laugh in the face of danger, and till the danger laughs back at them and says, I told you so.
Yes.
And I know with the advent of technology and a lot more, awareness to not necessarily the most positive of images as well, since you first wrote this book, 11 years ago, almost, 12 years ago, what have you. The fact that it's a pretty tight, fast-paced read, I think it clocks at about 125 pages or something. When you deliver that to Cemetery Dance, did you ever consider maybe expanding on that at all, or did you feel pretty solid where it's like, that's the story?
No. So I think the novella is the perfect format for horror. I always have. Most horror novels tend to read, in my opinion, like bloated novellas.
Yeah.
And the only difference is what they use to pad it with, and whether they use gore or whether they use pages and pages of backstory that's unnecessary or whatever. That's, in my opinion, the only difference between one author and the next is what they use to pad that story that could have been told in 115, 120 pages, what they use to blow it up to 300 pages. So I didn't want to do that, and I never want to do that. If you see a novel from me, it's because that story needed to be told in a novel length. I never sit down and say, I'm going to write a 85,000 word story. No, the story is the length that it is. Whatever the story demands, that's what I write.
Yeah, and I think readers are pretty intuitive as well. I think that if there's any room for them to maybe expand on what you've written, they've got all the direction there. It's very succinct, very tight. They know exactly what's going on. And however, their personal experiences might play into it, I think their imagination's going to take it away as opposed to spelling it out and tell them all the exact colors and textures and everything else. And like you said, just blowing it up for the sake of. And it kind of takes away I think it just chips away at the reader's imagination a bit more than just keeping it tight and mean.
I think the novella now has a lot more marketability than it used to, because people aren't really buying books off the shelf very much anymore. They're buying on Amazon and other platforms, whether it's ebook or audiobook or whatever. So it's not necessary. The whole idea of a novel being 80,000 to 90,000 words, you know where that came from?
Fantasy, I think, right?
No, it's because of the thickness of the book spine. That was it. That was the whole reason they came up with that, is because when a book is on the shelf, they wanted the spine to be a certain thickness so people would see it.
Interesting.
And that's where the 80,000 and 90,000 word novella length came from, is because it made a thicker spine so that when it's on a shelf, people notice it. Most people aren't buying books off the shelf these days, so it's no longer necessary to have this arbitrary number.
And I would think too for newer authors too, it's a bit of a less risk for the small press publishers too. It's less cost for printing these things out, less time maybe spent on the formatting, etc.
Yes, absolutely.
The fact that this one here is is a bit of an older title of yours as well, Roth. Like, what do you think that either new fans of yours, you're always picking up new fans, or even fans that are longtime readers of yours, even like me, that maybe just if they haven't quite read this one yet, what do you think that they're going to take away from this when they compare that to maybe some of your more, recent titles that have come out over the last year or so?
Well, I don't think it's any less vicious than what I'm writing now. I've always had a harder edge to me, so I don't think they're gonna go, oh, he was so much tamer 20 years ago or 15 years ago. Or whatever. No, I never was. So, so, and I certainly haven't gotten any more subtle these days either. So I think they'll find it very seamless between, what I'm writing now and what I was writing then. And even the socio-political messages that I put in my work, I was always doing that. So I write, most of my story ideas are inspired by arguments. I get pissed off about something and I write a whole book about it, to illustrate my point. Like, they're hypothetical situations, usually like a slippery slope type argument. Like this, oh, you really think this will work? Well, this is what could possibly happen. I read a whole novel about it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Some of my favorite books have been written that way too. I know, our late friend Jack Ketchum, Dallas Bear, was pretty famous for that as well. Where people said he would exploit all these topics and stuff. So no, these are things that just really pissed him off that he had to talk about, so that people can fully understand the weight of these horrible events that would happen. I think that's how Red got written. A bartender told him about that, and he's like, "Well, son of a bitch, what happened if that was Clint Eastwood's dog they killed?" And then he wrote that book.
Nice.
The next question you're at, it's, I guess in a way, it's going to have a little bit of unavoidable selfishness to it in a sense, because while and certainly a lot of folks that follow you were saddened by the relatively recent news that you had to close, the gym, where I've no doubt the lives that you affected are going to continue to thrive off of what they gained from your gym. It also seems that you've got a lot more time for writing now. I would assume. Hopefully, that's a safe assumption.
Yes.
So,
absolutely.
okay, good. I mean, we're certainly grateful and lucky for that you've got more time to do the writing. But I can only imagine that, like, was that a tough transition for you? That that shift of focus from you're doing so much writing, then you put all of your focus primarily into your gym schedule, and you wrote around that, to now you don't have that gym schedule that you've had to write around. Obviously, you've got other things in your life, but did you find that not having that particular focus that demanded so much of you caused a shift to your writing or the way that you're able to approach it now?
Well, certainly. The thing with the gym, it had become a strictly a labor of love, but also feeling obligations towards everyone. My fighters, the kids that I was training, their parents. I had parents who called me almost like I was their kid's father to complain about, like, their kids not doing their homework or their kids getting in trouble at school or whatever. And I would step in, well, put them on the phone, let me talk to them. And so it's more than just the hours I spent in the gym. It was meeting up with some of my fighters on the weekends to make sure that they were actually running when they were supposed to be running. So it wasn't just the hours in the gym, it was all the other time. Actually traveling to fights when I have 3 or 4 fighters fighting on an event and I have to travel and put up get a hotel room and spend basically my whole weekend doing that. That took a lot of time away from my writing. So the change was immediate. Like, when the gym closed, it was a ton of time. Like, I would come home and just, I am absolutely nothing to do right now. And so I would sit and write. Yes, exactly, exactly. When I decided to self-publish and I wrote Rabbit Hot, man, I think I cranked that out in about 2 months. I've been able to do that with the gym.
Yeah.
Um, so so it immediately had an effect on my writing. And I think Rabbit Hunt's one of the best things that I've written in years. And that was solely, I had that idea floating around in my head for about a good 5 years. And I just didn't have the time to write it.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's gonna be such a weird thing to let go of something that was obviously such a passion project for you that you obviously loved so much, and how can you also not feel like a lot of these kids and their families are part of your families when they seriously felt the same way of, towards you? That must have been such a weird, bittersweet thing to have to sort of say goodbye to that, but also maybe get some sort of a sense of, kind of a weight lifted off your shoulders so that you can put the weight of writing back onto it.
Yes, yes. So there was definitely a sense of weight being lifted off my shoulders.
Yeah.
And it having the writing made the closing the gym easier. Not easy by any means, but it made it softened the blow.
Yeah. One of the things I do want to talk to you, one last question regarding your gym, if you don't mind, Rath, is find though that there's anything that maybe kind of lingered as far as your overall experience from that and dealing with some of the fighters you had, some of their lives that might have been maybe a little bit tumultuous that you were able to step in and do something with. Was there any experiences you gained from that you think, whether it's anger or maybe even frustration, not being able to really help some of these guys out or whatnot, or not continue to help them out, maybe that you think is going to find its way into some of your stories moving forward?
I mine all of my experiences in life for characters, for stories. Um, there was a kid who, when I announced that the gym was opening in October 2021, something like that. When I announced that the gym was opening, uh, his mother contacted me and was like, uh, "Can my kid start now?" I said, "Well, the gym isn't built yet." And she said that he was having some issues with depression and he really needed something to do now. So I started meeting this kid in the park and training him in the park before the gym ever opened. And um, we became really close to the point where, yeah, his mother treated me like a parent and would call me whenever he was in trouble or anything like that. And so I definitely think of that kid often because I wonder, because I don't get those calls anymore. Now, I would hope that the influence that I had on him has continued and that he is staying the course because I really wanted that kid make it to college. And I hope that they continue.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the tough part, right? Is it not knowing, but at the same time, at least it sounds like you certainly made the positive impact while you had a chance to do that. And I suppose whether or not it was because he went on to other things outside of your gym, or the gym stopped when it did, I'm sure that at this point now he's got to make the decision, I guess, of what he's going to do with those lessons and that positive influence that he got from you. So hopefully he runs with it. I'm sure he probably will. Otherwise, maybe he'll be afraid that you'll pop up out of the bushes one day and it's like, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. Get on the path.
Yeah, only now. I used to always tell, because we would get fathers and sons and mothers and daughters who would come and train with us. And I used to always tell them, I was like, hey, in here, if your parent hits you, it's not child abuse, it's training.
That's awesome. But it goes both ways though, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's true too. That's true too.
It's like, all right, Dad, how about that allowance? I've been practicing those kicks now. Oh, that's awesome.
Mm.
If I could ask you one last question then, for sure, is that what do you think one of the main experiences that you maybe had as a gym owner and trainer has given you that you think is going to stay the longest? That you kind of look back on and thought, no matter what, that's the reason I did it.
So there was one young lady,
Yeah.
and she would come and kind of sit on the sidelines. And then one day her mother came up to me and said that she wanted to train, that the little girl wanted to train too. And this little girl was painfully shy. And in the beginning, I had to be very careful about how I spoke to her because she would break down in tears.
Oh, wow.
This little girl wound up a year later, competing in 2 or 3 matches.
Wow.
And she surpassed her brother. And it was just beautiful to see. And then there was another young boy he was about 10, I believe. And he was autistic. And his parents were a little bit in denial over it and kind of pushed him a little too much. And one day I was training him, and his father was getting upset because the kid wasn't listening and wasn't doing things right and everything. And I asked his father to leave the gym for a little bit, to give me about an hour. Just go sit in the car or go for a drive. And when he came back, I had this kid throwing combinations on the mitts, and his father's mouth just dropped open. It's me.
It's like, I could be nice, but let's be honest.
Yeah. And that's another one I wonder about that kid, because he made tremendous strides and became a lot more. The other thing was that he was laughing. The kid was laughing with me, and his father said, "I've never seen him laugh with anyone else."
That's huge. Wow, that's massive. And I have three kids now that I have a cat. Part of my cat. So yeah, I've got 3 kids as well that are on the spectrum also, and it's my one son's 5 years old. We got him into boxing. I think he's got his last class is going to be on Monday before he takes the rest of the summer off, and it's just incredible to see the difference it makes, but it also makes it incredible to see the difference that the right person can make as well, because not everybody can come up and just say do this or do that. It really takes that balance of knowing that you've got fairly rigorous boundaries for them, or borders for them rather, but that you also have the flexibility of letting them stay in those borders kind of on their own terms. At least that's how I found. And
absolutely.
Super grateful that we have a lot of patience, yeah. Because sometimes they're just done, it's overwhelmed, or there's who knows what happened that day, or maybe they skip lunch because, I don't know, the meal that's given didn't have the right texture or something, any number of things. And they get to the gym and the focus is tough. And yeah, it definitely makes a difference. And you've got a coach that's got the right patience, has a bit of fun with them, and still has that expectation of doing at least a little bit of work so they can be proud about what they do. So that's amazing, Rad. That's so hopefully you do end up going back to the coaching capacity to some degree, with the fighting. That sounds like a great way to make a good difference for you.
Well, maybe sometime in the future. I would, if I had a fighter that really needed my help and had a lot of potential, I think I would come out of retirement, because that's how I consider it now. I'm a retired boxing and Muay Thai trainer, but I would come out of retirement with the right fighter.
Well, sorry, I now have visions of the Clint Eastwood movie. Speaking of Clint Eastwood earlier, The $1 Billion Baby, and a scrumpy old man. I don't want to train him. No, you go ahead, and but you won't leave this guy alone.
Yeah.
So, as you mentioned before, you've also got a new book that's called The Rabbit Hunt, that's hopping down the lane towards us. That's awesome that you took some of the time away from the gym to bang that bad boy out in a couple of months. What can you tell us about this one, as far as where we can catch it, when, and I guess what we can expect out of a Rabbit Hunt?
So Rabbit Hunt, it is available on Amazon in ebook, trade paperback, and hardback. But if you want an autograph copy with some extra little goodies, stickers, bookmarks, temporary tattoos, other things, plus my signature on it, you can order directly from me at rapjwhorror.com.
Cool.
And yeah, that book's a lot of fun. I think it is. And it's been great to see, because when you're writing something, especially when you're injecting humor into it, you never know if the reader is going to share your sense of humor, or if it's going to become so off color that people are just going to cancel you or something.
It could happen.
And so it was really good to see that people appreciated the things I did with dialogue in that book, because that was the other thing. I wanted everyone in the book to sound like they were having real conversations, because particularly in the splatterpunk genre, a lot of times the dialogue can be bad. I call it splatterpunk dialogue, where the dialect is way thick, and it's like, you know,
Nobody
it's
talks like that.
it's like no one talks like this. Like
Yeah.
I hear, you know how many books I'll pick up that are written with a character from Texas or in Texas, and they are talking with this Texas accent that no one has used since the 60s and 70s. And I'm like, no one in Texas talks like that anymore.
Yeah, this guy's not gone out of his mother's basement for the last 30 years.
Exactly. But it's because they write based on books. I mean, sorry, not based on books, based on movies.
Sure.
Rather than actually going to the place and meeting people and writing it authentically, they'll go, oh, well, this is how they sound in movies, so this is correct. And then splatterpunk is kind of known to be over the top anyway. So there's a certain amount of dialogue that's deliberately over the top. And I just didn't want to do that. I wanted dialogue that sounded authentic and real to the ear. And I also wanted that humor.
Right.
And it's been really rewarding to hear people mention how realistic the dialogue was, and how many times they laughed on reading the book and cringe.
I know, right?
Yeah, my idea, how I described it when I first started writing it, was if Dave Chappelle were writing an extreme horror novel, what would it sound like?
Oh,
And
geez.
I think I nailed it.
That's awesome. And I can just imagine what somebody must be thinking too, especially if they're familiar with you and they see somebody on the bus, reading it, and maybe they haven't heard of the title. They just see your name on the title and somebody's laughing at it. Feel like, all right, I'm going to like kind of shift down the aisle over here, get away from this guy laughing at something. Maybe I don't know, your most recent memory is like The Resurrectionist or something, where there's nothing to laugh about in that book.
Yeah,
So
that's typically been my MO, is that it's an output humor in my book. My books tend to be very dark and bleak and almost nihilistic. And I wanted to shift from that and to show some growth and some range. So
yeah, maybe after all the stuff you've been through too with the gym and everything else going on, it was time to laugh at some of the craziness of the world.
yes, absolutely.
So that's cool. And I know when you first described the description of the for Rabbit Hunt as well, which essentially is 6 college kids who go into the woods, they drop acid, eat mushrooms, smoke weed, with nature, and have sex. But of course, they're not alone, as the synopsis suggests. I had to wonder if if this was sort of a typical night out, maybe for young Wrath. Because considering that I've no doubt that you've certainly exercised a lot of your demons with some of the more intense stories that you've told that we just mentioned. Did you find that you still were able to draw from your personal experiences and personal vantage point, the world around you when you sat down to write the rabbit tale? I know you mentioned that it's hard for you not to put some experiences into this. I imagine Rabbit Hunt wasn't really any different.
Absolutely. So what always drives me crazy about the way horror authors and extreme horror authors in particular are perceived is that we're always identified with the villains that we write. But we also wrote the victims. We also wrote the heroes. We wrote all of that is us. But for some reason, we only got people, oh, you're horrible. You wrote this horrible villain. It's like, yeah, I wrote the hero too.
Right.
And it's, it always surprises me that continues. So yeah, I draw on all my experiences, not just my my personal lived experiences, but even my observations of other people. When I was in high school, because I went to creative and performing arts high school, I went to high school with a lot of famous people. I went to high
Okay.
school with the guys from Boys to Men, guys from that rap group The Roots, which I think is like Jimmy Kimmel's band now.
Oh, no kidding. The
But I
Roots,
went
yeah.
to I went to school with a lot of people, and writers were just kind of the redheaded stepchildren. We were kind of no one cared what we were doing,
Yeah, just playing in our
and so
sandbox.
yeah. Well, we were doing some cool stuff. Like I had friends, one in particular, who we would go to the mall after school and just sit and watch people and make up stories about.
Oh,
And
I
after
get
a
that.
while, we would get like o- other people from the school who weren't writers who just thought it was hilarious when we would do that and just sit and listen to the stories we would make up. Like we'd see a woman walk by and we're like, oh, that's Martha. She lives in South Philly. She's got 3 kids. 2 of them are Italian and one of them looks sort of Puerto Rican, but nobody talks about it. and, and we would just kind of do this whole thing and everyone would just crack up. Well, I still do that to this day. And when I see someone
Yeah.
who looks unusual or looks interesting, I make up stories about it in my head, and those stories wind up in my novel. When I hear an interesting piece of dialogue, uh, I store that because I'm going to use that probably in a story or a novel or something. So, what I was doing back in the '80s, I'm still doing today. Only now I get paid for
That's awesome. Well, I guess then you just got paid an experience and
it. Yeah,
honing up the skills. But no, that's great. And apparently that's also a great way of understanding dialogue as well and getting a better sense of the way that people maybe talk in your mom's basement is completely different than what people talk about in the mall or a cafe or what have you. I think I remember even reading somewhere that Elmore Leonard used to do that quite a bit, where he would just listen on people's conversations and find that a lot of times it was the things that they didn't say that spoke more volumes than the things that that
yeah.
they did say.
And just like even just the organic humor that happens. Like a lot of times when you're trying to write humor, you think of it in terms of jokes.
Yeah.
Most people don't talk in jokes.
Right.
So the humor it kind of evolves naturally from the conversation,
Yeah.
and so it's so much easier to do that when you just steal a real conversation.
Exactly. That's a lot more spontaneous of that. Like I don't know how Jeff Strand does it and comes across where, it's like a
Jeff
joke's
Strand
a
is
minute
brilliant.
is yeah, and it comes across natural. And I mean even his uh, you know, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes one where he tried to get a joke at every page. He did it and I mean he created the zaniness, but yeah, somehow it worked. It all flowed as opposed to, like you said, middle of a perfectly serious conversation that, you're not going to get a character like, wait a minute, did you hear the one about? And
Exactly.
just doesn't work that way. Very
Exactly.
stilted. And Rath, I love the fact too. You talked a little bit about about splatter, especially how it doesn't have a great reputation for the most natural dialogue dialogue around. And I read not too long ago too. I think it was. I mean, we hear about it all the time, but recently I read a thread on Reddit. I think it was where folks were bashing. They just pile it on like they tend to do on extreme books for being gross and extreme for the sake of just being gross and extreme. What kind of advice would you maybe offer folks who they
Well,
want to write extreme horror, but they're maybe afraid of being seen as just trying to being that kid in the back of the classroom who's just making noise for the sake of making noise.
well, what's interesting to me is you never hear someone who has written a tearjerker accused of, oh, that's just sadness for the sake of sadness.
Well, that's
You
a
don't
good
hear
point.
someone who's written a romance be like, oh, yeah, that's just love for the sake of love. Well,
I never thought about that
sir,
way. Yeah, it is.
like the idea that you're going to pick up a horror novel and definitely extreme novel and complain about violence for the sake of violence or gore for the sake of gore is just ridiculous to me. It's like I said, it's like picking up a romance novel and complaining about like oh, this is just love for the sake of love. It's the dumbest argument ever. Um,
That's great.
Now, I don't like when I feel as if the violence has just been shoehorned in and it doesn't
Yeah.
evolve naturally from the plot, or when there's gross elements that feel like they just come out of nowhere and just have been kind of shoehorned in unnaturally.
Yeah.
I think that is evidence of bad writing, and I have seen a lot of that. But that's when people say that extreme horror or splatterpunk is easy to write. I point to those books because if it's so easy to write, why are there so many people doing it badly?
Right.
Like that is those things prove, say in my mind, that it isn't easy to write.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Of course, you've got certainly several books. I mean, one of them I think certainly would be, I mean, I'm trying to pick one that people would maybe pick out as they would maybe see that as gratuitous. I mean, certainly the Resurrectionist would be a big one for that.
Succulent Prey. Succulent Prey
Yeah,
is the one.
I was on the fence about that one. Yeah, I could see that too, but in a sense, I was hesitant about mentioning that, but maybe that's a perfect example because it also has an amazing allegory of this monster that, yeah, obviously he's monstrous by nature, but he's also a monster that's just misunderstood, that maybe there's something to it that we could learn from and maybe even somehow help, whether it's through medical intervention or otherwise. So to me, I found that really said had a lot of social commentary where you see this monster, you automatically just peg it a certain way without thinking, can we help them? Do we maybe just misunderstand them as opposed to, yeah, gross, step on it kind of thing?
Succulent Prey was a metaphor for addiction. That was really the whole point of that book. And
True.
it was basically this guy struggling with an addiction and struggling to get over it for the sake of the people that he loved. His addiction just happened to be cannibalism.
Yeah. Oops. Yeah.
Well, that was what it was. It was a metaphor for addiction. And Prey Drive, when I wrote that, it was kind of an indictment on the justice system and the penal system in America. And it also continued the theme of addiction. But what we do with addicts, especially when they commit a crime, is we lock them up and forget about it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all of those things I was trying to work out. There are a few books that are novel length that I've written that don't have some other meaning to them, because I have a hard time writing fluff. You know, I have a hard time writing just, I know, escapism. It's because it bores me, honestly. Like when my leisure time, I read the most intense books I can find. I was a philosophy major, so I read like intense books in my leisure time. I watch documentaries on crazy stuff, and I crave intensity.
Yeah.
And if the book doesn't have that intensity, it doesn't have the social commentary, it doesn't have the deeper meaning, I get bored reading it, and I definitely would get bored writing it.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, because it's like, if you're not looking forward to reading or to writing the next chapter, why should you expect your reader to look forward to reading the next chapter?
Exactly.
That's great. And I think that's a lot too, that a lot of certainly newer writers maybe try a little bit too hard to do, where they try to write for the audience as opposed to writing for themselves and then drawing that type of an audience to them. You know, and I think readers can see through that.
Yeah, and I think as much as I love this new resurgence of interest in splatterpunk and extreme horror, I think just like the paranormal romances of the 90s and the sexy vampires and then the zombies in the early aughts, all of these people who are rushing to jump on that bandwagon are, in my mind, diluting the genre and leading to those criticisms of gore for the sake of gore and not being, no talent involved and so on and so forth. They're perpetuating that by jumping in just because it's what's hot right now and not what's passionate, not what they're passionate about, not what they actually have an interest in, but they're writing it just because it's what's hot right now. And they're making they're kind of perpetuating that myth that that's all splatterpunk is by writing this garbage. So I wish that
Yeah.
if this isn't something that you love to write, don't write it just to make a buck. You know, if this isn't something you're passionate about, don't jump on it just because it's what's hot right now. Uh, I wish
Yeah, yeah,
people would try to write what they love. Full stop.
exactly. And I think that they're not just fooling the readers, but they're fooling themselves too. I think that it's only inevitable that at some point they're just going to end up losing integrity as a capable writer. They're gonna, I think people are going to see right through that and lose a lot of respect of the readers and the publishers as well. I mean, heck, even the yeah, I guess it's fairly rare. Maybe it's more rare than it should be, where people really do stay true to themselves. I mean, I was watching a thing not too long ago about the Hawk Tuah girl, who even she decided to stay true to herself, where she got all these offers, and I'm sure it would be so easy to jump on the bandwagon that she created, I guess. And she's like, "No, I'm not doing any of this stuff. That's not what I'm all about," kind of thing. Although I'm sure she gets paid well to show up to events and things, she's at least not, you know, going to be in like the next Playboy magazine just because she can be in it. She's like, I'm not about that life. So,
Yeah.
and kudos to all the authors that stick with their guns too.
Yeah, exactly. It just does the genre a disservice. Like we always already get enough slings and arrows thrown our way without someone basically proving the critics right by writing garbage.
Exactly. And I know one thing that one thing, Rath, I was really looking forward to asking you about, because you're a veteran of the genre. Not saying you're old, but you've been doing this for, for a little while. You got a lot of great experiences. Um, I wanted to kind of take more of a higher level overview and maybe ask you to sort of look into your crystal ball for a moment, if you can, as far as the discussion about the future of horror, in general, because I know that there's some among us, and I've actually heard some very reputable veterans who, have far more experience and insight in this thing of ours that, I'll ever have, is that they feel that implosion is imminent. I've heard it suggested that the signs were already there, just like they were during, the leisure collapse and, the collapse before that, and the one of those big signs points to the saturation that's brought on by, this huge influx of new and, wickedly talented batch of writers that we've got over the last several years. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because I actually saw another fairly new author who's doing extremely well the other day, saying that, it seems like there's all these small press magazines and publications that are coming out. And this is great. This is a sign that, there's this huge, awesome wave, and let's all ride it together kind of thing. Whereas there's other veterans going back and thinking, yeah, I see how this is going to end, but
Exactly.
do
Exactly.
you see the same thing too, or do you think we're having a readership that's growing along with the implosion of writers, but no product?
So our readership is growing, but we'll always be a subgenre. We'll always be kind of a literary ghetto. So I don't think that it's going to grow enough to support all the people who are just jumping on the bandwagon. Uh, there's been a recent trend where these book talkers and bookstagrammers are, they get a big following
Mm-hmm.
from their reviews, and then they decide, I'm going to write a book myself. And I'm not saying that they wouldn't otherwise write a book. And I hope that they're writing the book because they always wanted to be a writer, and not just because it's what's hot right now.
Yeah.
But I have read a couple of books from a couple of people who were former book reviewers that it's just terrible. It's clear that you have not been honing your craft all this time, that you just thought, hey, this is hot. I've got 20,000 followers. I'm going to,
My son.
jump on this trend.
Yeah.
And it to me is kind of like you said, it's the beginning of the end for the genre. Like in the 80s, that's what killed it. That's what killed horror in the 80s, is inferior products hitting the market. That's what in the leisure booking implosion. Yes, we had the market factors with the Great Recession and all of that, but also there was a lot of junk being put out as well.
Yeah,
The market cannot endure that, especially now when our attention spans are so much shorter. We want everything
absolutely.
fast and we want it quick. And if you're feeding people junk food, literary or otherwise, eventually they're going to get sick.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully it'll add to the genre too. It's funny you say that. All these reviewers and they want to be writers as well. And it's a lot more work than you think it is. I mean, I've got a nonfiction one coming out soon, and just going through the editing process of that, it is a lot, and it definitely gives you a lot more appreciation. So I certainly hope that anybody that is a reviewer, by all means, go through that process. Hopefully they don't just self-publish it, so they get a fuller appreciation. They learn a lot more that way, and they get a full appreciation of working with the publishers. They get a sense of the work that goes into it. I've also got a short novel too, like 50,000 words. I guess like just barely a novel. That's out for editing right now. So I'm hoping that that's not going to come in and dilute the genre as well. But I think that's everybody that's thinks that it's easy. It's not, and I really hope that as much as it's a no barrier to entry with the whole self publishing, that anybody can post up on the Kindle direct publishing with Amazon, and bam, they're an author. And it's like, well, you should at least go through through the channels of getting that published first, I think, and then maybe down the road when you've got the chops and you've been verified as a talented author with a sense of editing and basic grammar on that, maybe give it a shot.
Yeah, and hire an editor. Get
Mhm.
real beta readers who have experience at it, not your best friend down the street or your grandmother or whoever else. Get real beta readers who are also other writers or experienced reviewers or editors, and hire an editor.
Yeah.
Don't get your friend to do it. I don't care if your friend is a brilliant writer. Don't get them to do it. Hire an editor who's going to be ruthless and rip your stuff apart. That's how you improve. And there are books that I've read recently where it's very clear that they did not hire an editor. Now, I'm not saying that your book's going to be perfect if you hire an editor. I pick up books that I've written where they've gone through 2 and 3 editors, and there's still typos in it, and there's still continuity errors and things like that. And they've gone through several editors. Yeah. Recently, I had one where I screwed up, and I sent it to all 3 editors that I had was working with at once. And when they sent their stuff back, I thought that I incorporated all the suggestions from all 3 into one document, but I hadn't. I'd only sent the edits from one editor.
No.
And missed all what everyone else had pointed out. And that became a finished product. But, so things happen.
Yeah, sure.
Things happen. But I made the effort. I made the effort. And you can tell when people don't make the effort.
Yeah, yeah. And like you said, it really does absolutely hurt the genre in that regard. Is there any advice that you would give to anybody? So if there is certainly a pending implosion that's coming at the end of this awesome wave, is there any suggestions that you would give to maybe any new authors who, are maybe seeing some popularity in their stuff, or they're just grabbing on that whole shit handle and thinking, good luck with me?
If you're serious about this genre, if you're serious about being a writer, don't imitate the other writers that you like. Be authentically yourself. Write your story. Don't try to be another, Aaron Beauregard or Daniel Volpe or me or Monica O'Rourke or whoever, Jack Ketchum or Richard Lehman or whoever you've grown up reading. Don't try to imitate them. All right, that's what you do. If you're still imitating other authors, you're not ready yet. You're not ready yet. That's what you do when you're starting out. We all started out, if you're my age, we all started out imitating Stephen King. We weren't getting published when we were doing that. we weren't getting published when we were doing that. But now, because of small press and because of, specifically self-publishing, people are getting published who are just imitating the other writers that they're reading and haven't found their authentic voice yet. Wait, find your voice, then publish.
Yeah, and if I could add to that too, Rath, do you also think it's probably a good idea to read outside of your genre so you're not just always reading maybe 5 great authors that you love? And I think that even if no matter how hard you try not to write like them, it's going to be almost impossible because if they're all that you know, seems like it'd be good advice too to read outside the genre, read outside your, Fab Five, if, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love horror. I go through long stints where I don't read it. Long stints where I don't read horror. I'll read horror adjacent things like true crime, or read, crime fiction or mysteries or something like that, dark romance. I'll read that type of stuff. That's horror adjacent. I also will read like Psychology Today, Scientific American, those type of things as well for ideas. And staying up on current events. Like, actually, I think if you're a writer, it's kind of important that you read the news. Read the news, if nothing else. If you're stuck in the horror thing and that's all you're going to read, as far as fiction goes, at least read the news.
Absolutely. I think there's so many fascinating ideas from reading the news. I know Jorah Lansdale is famous for that too, where he'll pick a couple things from the news. Well, even Jack Ketchum to a degree as well. They'll put that in with a few different ideas. I mean, I even read the news this morning talking about some sort of sub-sea level microcontinent that they apparently discovered. And I'm just thinking the possibilities for that are endless. Or about the latest asteroid. I swear every time I read the news, there's a new asteroid that's flying towards Earth, and then you read it and it's like, yeah, it's about 3 million miles that way. We're good. But the possibilities and the ideas are certainly there.
Absolutely.
Okay, very cool. And and I know after reading some of your books as well, I tend to gravitate towards a book that I think is probably going to give me a nice warm hug when I'm done with it. I'll read maybe some Mitch Albom or something like that that's going to tell me the world's okay. Like, okay, good. I go back to read another one of Rath's books. Now that I know it's probably going to be all right afterwards.
Yeah.
So, Rath, I cannot thank you enough for your time today, man, and for sharing a lot of your insight, your wisdom. This has been incredible. I missed seeing you at the last AuthorCon as well in Williamsburg, Virginia. So I think by the time I got there to your table, you're completely sold out, and you were already kind of in the wind. So, what is it that, if you don't mind sharing with with everybody watching this here, what is it you're working on now that, maybe throughout the rest of the year that you're most excited about?
So, right now I'm working on a novelette, kind of a little smaller than a novel, a novella. Sorry, a little smaller than the typical novella, called The Bug Collector. It's pretty much written. It's I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but
Sure.
It's basically a guy who collects STIs and
So I'm just like picturing this deck of cards now, and it's
yeah. And a woman who he had infected, because it's hard to acquire new infections and not also distribute the infections that you already have. Basically kidnaps him and wants to know why he's done this to her. And he's telling his life story while being tortured. So that's the book. And that should be coming out sometime in August. I was hoping to have it ready for KillerCon, but life got in the way. So it won't be coming out in time for KillerCon, but I will also be at TBRCon in Nashville, and then I will be at Scares I Care in St. Louis. So between those, I think it'll definitely be out in time for Nashville, and so I will have it in St. Louis as well.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, look forward to that one. Sometimes it's nice to spend just a little bit of time with you and your crazy dark world. So this is nice. Again, thank you so much. What's the best way to keep up with your work, Rath? Maybe even catch up with you in person. You mentioned a couple of the cons you're up to. Is there any kind of
So
sorry, go ahead.
I do have a Substack, Words of Wrath.
Yep.
So if you're a Substack subscriber, look me up. I whatever is pissing me off that day, it's probably gonna show up in my Substack. And then of course there's Facebook and Instagram, and I am on TikTok as well.
Okay. Very cool. And I'll put a links down for that too. So everybody watch this. You can just go down to the description. There'll be all kinds of links there. And I just realized this entire time. So normally the view that I have on our panel is a bit wider. So I've been talking with my hands, and I didn't realize until like just a second that you can't actually see my hands. But that's all right. So I just pointed, where's my hand? There it is. There you go. Yeah, down there. I'll put the descriptions and stuff all down there at the links. Yeah, for anybody that hasn't, that's not following you right now, especially on your Substack, on your newsletter, 100% do that. I think that it's awesome finding out, sort of how the world works through your perspective and your anger. And you usually have a lot of stuff that makes a lot of sense, where I was like, never really thought about it that way. That makes a lot of sense. So you speak very eloquently, very brutally, very honestly. So I think that obviously carries through in everything that you do. That's just, that's
my next post will probably get me canceled, but thank you anyway.
Nice. So everybody sign up right now and go and read it before it's too late. That's awesome, man. Thank you very much again, Wrath, for doing this, man. Really, really appreciate it.
All right, thank you. I've had a blast.